My name is Rich Schmidt. We're here at Stoller Family Estate. It's July 10th, 2017. We're here with Bill Stoller. And Bill, we're going to start you off with a nice easy question, which is why wine?
Why wine? Why not? Maybe the better question. My start in wine was not until I had graduated from college and had had some interest and took a class in wine tasting, basically, at Portland Community College, and enjoyed it, and so decided to take a few more educational classes, and I did, and that kind of steamrolled into collecting wine and purchasing wine from various places, and even somewhat, interested in the future of what Oregon was doing in the wine industry, and so I followed up on that, and eventually our family property came up for sale, and that was more pride than perhaps sense, but acquired it, and the rest is what's happened.
So tell us a little bit about what you're doing before you got into wine. I know you had a successful business before that as well.
The wine business hasn't taken me away from any of my other businesses. So I started in downtown Portland as a placement consultant for an employment agency named Acme Personnel Service. And 10 years later, they had financial trouble, and I bought my job and the office, and then continued to be actually a franchisee of theirs, because I was a corporate manager. And then about 3 months later, they actually ran into financial trouble, and two other people and myself picked up the pieces, and they really went bankrupt, and so we picked up the pieces and developed another company, and it's now called Express Employment Professionals, and we primarily focused from the very beginning on franchising the business of staffing offices, which is primarily temporary help. So we focused on temporary help, where the other company focused on permanent placement.
Okay. And so then from there, at some point, that's when you're developing your interest in wine and kind of getting into the wine industry.
That certainly gave me the vehicle in terms of being somewhat successful in the staffing business and the franchising business, that in 1993, when the property came up for sale, then I was able to acquire it. And yes, so that certainly was a stepping stone that allowed the acquisition.
And so as you're working toward that, give me an idea of how your business background sort of helped prepare you to get into this industry. Did you go, we talked a lot of people going without their eyes open, so I'm assuming you were not one of those people.
Oh, I think everybody that goes in the wine business gets a little education in many aspects of it. I think that people can go into debt very quickly and very easily, and it's really hard to come out of that debt. And so I didn't have to go into debt. I was able to provide capital directly into the business as opposed to borrowing. And so from a financial standpoint, that's always been very helpful. But planting the right plants, planting them in the right location, starting your own label. It's not easy, and people think that winemakers or wine people think that selling them the wine is not going to be a problem, but it is. You can't have inventory that needs to be sold, and that's just money that's kind of being wasted if you can't sell what you produced. Sure. That doesn't go into libraries. So it's a huge education, and it's totally different, I think, than most other businesses, because a business-to-business sale is a lot different than a business-to-consumer sale. So that's really the major differences, other than it's also an agricultural-based industry, and the weather gods are the ones that control how how good the grapes will end up being.
So, give me an idea of what your business philosophy is and sort of how you've developed it over the years.
Well, I think as much as possible, you don't want to get into too much debt. And I think, my father always told me that he tried to pay cash for everything so he would not have the debt, or he wouldn't buy it, or he had a significant amount of down payment for it so it wouldn't be that difficult. So I've always had that as a business philosophy, but more important is the people that you have, the people you employ. It's the culture that you create, and those are the two keys in I think any business, is having the right culture and then having the people that execute the culture and the values that you want to have in business.
So you mentioned a little bit about buying the property here and investing in Chehalem. That was your first kind of entree into the industry. So tell me about your preparation for that and then kind of how you went about doing it.
Well, Harry Peterson Nedry has certainly been a great mentor in the business, and in terms of learning about wine and even before getting into the business. But I made a small investment in their limited partnership in the vineyards. And then at 1992, I believe it was, he wanted to go commercial with Chehalem brand. And so he sent a letter out to all the limited partners, and I was the only one that responded. And so he and I became partners in Chehalem, and we still are today. But again, it's been insightful and helpful in learning it from the Chehalem side of the business, and continues to be. And then really just started wanting to be a grape grower, and then several years later just decided then, well, maybe we should have our own brand.
And you mentioned this was the family land. Tell us a little about how you acquired the family land.
Well, this property was bought by my father and uncle in 1943. And in 1948, they purchased another farm that's 2 miles away from here. So just after I was born, my family moved to the other farm, and my uncle and aunt and cousins grew up here, and then I grew up there. But we were a very close family, and we were up here, or they were down there for meals and birthdays and holidays, etc. So after a period of time, then my cousin, John Stoller, took over for his dad. And then in 1993, he decided to get out of the business and to sell the farm and so forth. And so I was able to come in and do that. But it had been a turkey farm for 50 years prior to that. And just before getting on tape here, I was seeing the special that the News Register did on the early history of the Turkey Rama. And it's nothing like it is today. But I remember going out with my father and helping with the turkey races and helping with the cooking and helping with the setting up of the tables and so forth. And it was fun. But I've had the turkey since, and I didn't realize it was this last weekend, and I would have gone out and got my half turkey if I'd have known that.
So when you bought the land, you purchased it with the intention of growing grapes here?
Yes, definitely. And what I've always said is that you just go out and look at the property, and the land was created to be a vineyard. I mean, there's nothing better than grapes to be grown on this land. And so was the whole objective was to fill every possible vineyard land space with vines. And we've pretty much done that. We're got just a little bit left, but not much.
So what makes the land so special? What makes it so perfect for grapes?
Well, you can see the south slope of the Dundee Hills. That obviously is the first one. And having that slope, but we also have, southwest slopes on the property. We certainly have the right soils for it. And on the west side, we actually have younger soil. That's it's still jory, but I think you can. There's younger versions of jory soil that has different names, and I don't think that's important. But so it has that proper soil to grow. It's volcanic, obviously, and so it's well drained, and just the climate. I've never tested it, or anybody's never analyzed it, but we probably have 4 or 5 microclimates on this 400-acre property, and so different weather patterns occurred in different areas of the land, and so that adds to the terroir, and having anything that adds something different, and so when you put the wines together, you get something that's quite nice.
So I want to go back a little bit to when you were investing in Chehalem in 1992. How did you go about learning? What did Harry want to teach you? What did you need to know to get into the business?
Well, he certainly. I observed more than being taught, or I asked questions than being taught. But for the most part, it's just observing and absorbing, and that's how you learn. And then you read about different types of wines around the world, and then. One of the groups in Oregon here put together a book on vineyards, and there's like about 24 or 5 chapters, and each chapter I think was written by a different viticulturist or winemaker, and so that was fascinating to be able to read that. But it's just a lot of it's just self-education, but when you have a mentor and you listen to them, then you learn a lot.
So then, when you're starting here, what was the biggest priority for you? What were the first steps? What was the most important thing to you?
Well, I remember walking through the land with Harry and Patrice Rion, who we had an affiliation with from Burgundy, and as Patrice walked the land with us, his vision is that we'd probably only plant about 25 hectares, and we'll have over 200 acres. But from a hectare standpoint, it's and as a matter of fact, that's almost 200 acres. But I think he probably was more like 50 hectares, and so that would be about 125 acres. And we won't have double that, but we'll have significantly more than that. But he wanted to keep things, sort of separated and keep the eco environment to where you wouldn't have as much problems later on with insects and so forth. But as we also walked the land, he said, well, the first thing you need to do, though, is to hire someone to sell your wine. So that's a pretty telling story, is that, as I mentioned earlier, you do have to find someone that's going to, or some way to sell your wine. And so whether he said someone or you need a program to sell the wine, which is what I think he really meant, that was the key and the first thing he taught us. But in terms of what we wanted it to be, we wanted it to be Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And then you plant, some other different varietals just to be able to sell from the tasting room, and that's what we've done. But it's 90+% Pinot Noir and Chardonnay.
Sure. And so, how have you found, now that you're in the industry, like now you have the label, how have you found the sales? Has it been as challenging as he predicted?
Well, I think you got to develop a brand, but you have to have people that come by, but yes, it hasn't been easy, and we had some vintages that we had more inventory than we wanted. Fortunately, we've been able to go through that from a library sales and some specials that we've done. But it's that word of mouth that really helps sell your wine, and I think there's two key things that have happened with us, and it all really evolves around people and certainly some investment. But our small little tasting room in the original winery that we built was just getting overcrowded, and it was loud, and it just needed. We needed more space, and so the people were the first ones to tell you that something's got to be done, and so we did. We then built a new tasting room, and that tasting room is somewhat unique in design, and shows off the scenery that we have, but it looks up the hill as opposed to being up looking down, and I think that's one of the unique characters that we have. Here at Stoller Family Estate is that view that we look up, plus it's undulating. And so once that was built, we were able to draw people to this site, and it kind of fed on itself. We had a great tasting room staff, and then people just kept coming back. And so even the tour groups, transportation companies that bring people, this is one of the spots that they enjoy bringing their people, because they know they're going to get good service, and they're going to get good wine and a great view. So that has really spawned, and it's just by word of mouth, people come, and it's not without hard work from our marketing crew and our tasting room staff that has done that. And then the other is you have the direct consumer sale, and then you have sales through the distribution channel. And about 4 years ago, we were able to find the right distributor here in Oregon, and Young's Market has done a terrific job for us. They're a great partner, and they have just gone beyond expectation in terms of representing our brand and becoming as passionate as our people are about people tasting our wine and drinking our wine.
So let's talk a little bit about that. When you are hiring people to work at Stoller, what are you looking for? What are your key characteristics?
Well, people that like people, people that have good values, that are common values that we have, obviously good communicators, and people who can learn to describe wine. So you have to have a lot of good communication skills. And, it's kind of funny, but, it's those majors in college that you don't think about very often, but communication, literature, English, even foreign languages comes in handy. But it's just being able to make that presentation. So speech classes and whatnot. Those kind of the soft skills and the soft classes that you take. But that's what liberal arts is all about, and those people can fit in well here, as well as those that have been in business or even haven't gone to college. That doesn't make much difference. But you just look for people that have a desire and have the attitude and then the aptitude to execute.
So we don't get to interview too many local liberal arts graduates. So when we do, we always like to ask them, as a graduate of Pacific, tell us a little bit about how liberal arts sort of shaped your perspective going into your career.
Well, I think college is pretty much a liberal arts program, because most of the first 2 years you take should be some of the general electives that you're required to do, and whether it's sociology, psychology, English, science classes, history classes, And I've always loved history, and so I always took as many of those courses as I could. I mean, even anthropology, that was a fun class. So those are the kind of the first 2 years, and then the last 2 years you really focus on whatever your major is. But then you have electives too, and I took my history classes and, along with the business courses that I took. But life, once you get out of school, and even while you're in school, but everything a person does, whether it's their own personal checking account, savings account, house account, whatever, you have payables, you may have receivables if you're selling something, but you're managing your own household and your financial situation, and it's funny, that's what you learn in business. And I think there's a lot of people that are ill-equipped when they go to college, and even when they finish college, that they don't manage that quite as well as they should have as they went along. So, and we have a huge student debt problem in this country, and I think either it was presented wrong or it was taken wrong by the receiver, and they didn't quite understand what the obligations would be. But you've got to earn your way. You can't just be given your way through anything. So I think it's a key that people have to understand, that you earn your way through life, and things aren't given to you.
So shortly after you opened, you were involved in the Dundee Hills AVA designation. So tell me a little bit about that and why you saw the need.
Well, the Dundee Hills Aviation didn't really come about when we first started. It came about later, but we've always been involved in it. And I think most areas like to have another way to describe their vineyard and their wines. And when you have the Willamette Valley that covers such a big area, you then want to kind of narrow that and be able to describe your particular area, and that's what an AVA is, American Viticultural Area, is it's got to have some distinctness with that area, and whether it's soil, microclimate, or just what it produces is different than what another AVA is, and I think people certainly have their take on what Dundee Hills has its significance as opposed to Chehalem Mountains or Ribbon Ridge or McMinnville Mountains or Eola Hills or whatever.
What is it to you? What's distinct about Dundee Hills to you?
Well, I think we have a little more earthiness, I think, to our wines. We certainly have some really nice red fruits to it, as opposed to the darker fruits. We certainly get into the dark cherry, but in many cases it might be the lighter cherries. And then of course you've got the different clones that subtract to that, because there's some clones that are definitely bigger and they're not quite as red. They're darker reds than another clone. So it's just a nice combination, I think, and just even my tasting today, it's really hard to tell a lot of difference between a lot of the wines, but there is differences, and sometimes it could be the winemaking process, and sometimes it's not, but or it's the year. But to me, great Pinot Noir does come out of Oregon, and some excels and some is not quite as exceptional, but overall it's a tremendous area to raise Pinot Noir. Sure. And Chardonnay. And Chardonnay. Sure.
So speaking of winemaking, do you have much input into winemaking? Do you have a specific preference for how your wine is made, or do you leave it mostly to the winemaker? Well,
I think there's another business trait that I've learned over the years, and that is delegation. And think I've learned that pretty well. I'm not trained in winemaking. I'm not probably the greatest taster in the world. I have my own thoughts, my own ideas on it, and usually in blind tastings, it produces pretty good results. Speaking of myself, but no, we've been fortunate enough to have Melissa Burr ever since we've had our facility in 2005, and even 2 vintages before that. She helped make our wine, and she's been consistent, and she's growing, and our support staff is growing. The vineyard has matured, and because of that, I think our wines get better and better. And so I've continued to delegate that. We have 2 other winemakers now, and believe me, I couldn't teach them anything. So I. And you know, my business life has taken me away during much of the trials that they do the tastings, and so I'm just I'm not around enough to participate as much in that.
But you're happy with the product?
Very happy, very happy.
So I noticed as we were around here, there's a lot of, you're obviously, sustainability is obviously a big deal to you. Can you tell me a little bit about why that is, or why you're... I've always been enthralled with solar generation. And I think if there was one thing that might describe, and it might be 2 things, but I really believe that when you build something or you create something, you do it for sustainability purposes. And so when we built this winery and the tasting room, I said to the architect, I just want it to last 200 years. And so in making sure that it's built the right way for sustainability. And then I think with that, and especially the solar generation, is efficiencies. And by having efficiencies, by being able to produce something that doesn't take any other source other than the equipment, the photovoltaics, and then the converters to convert it from direct to alternate energy, electricity. It's just an efficient process. So it's out there. Why not take advantage of it? Sure.
So we've put it on 3 of our structures, and we are energy neutral. And so we produce as much as we take from the electrical utility.
Wow. And it's also LEED Gold certified.
Yes, and I had not known what LEED was, and our architect had not done anything with LEED either. But they asked the question if I'd like to do it, and I said, well, educate me on it. So they had to go get educated, and so they educated me, and I said, sure, why not try to do that? There had not been a full winery that had been ever designated with a LEED, other than one other in Ontario, Canada, and it was on the lake, Niagara Lake, I believe, and so they were the first, and then we were the second, and we were the first gold LEED certified anywhere, and it's amazing. I mean, you're looking at 13 years ago when we got our designation, and there are many wineries now that are certified. There were some structures I found out later that had been LEED certified in Portland, but now I don't know of a building that's not built that's not LEED certified.
Well, were there any specific challenges to what you wanted to do with what it would have to do to be LEED certified?
We didn't really do anything that I would have done differently. I mean, I said I wanted solar from the beginning. You know, I've always believed in recycling, and so 95% of the unusable material that we had around here was recycled, or the extras. And then in terms of treating the land the way it's supposed to be treated, and the construction materials was very important. And you learned also, and you learn a few things, but one of the things is paint. You know, there can be paints that are just not good for your winery and for your wines. And so you have to select the right kind of paint, the right kind of flooring, and what to put on the surface. So that was a nice educational process. But everything else was things we would have done regardless. But I'd also purchased, I don't know how many years ago, prior to building this, probably 8 years prior, some of the old beams, clear growth timbers that in 70 years ago, that's what they built with. You know, the old growth timbers, and so we bought those and we kept them, and so most of our support beams and some of our cross beams and everything outside that people see is from that warehouse that was in Northwest Portland. So maybe that's what probably initially started it, but they're just beautiful, and they stay very, very, very nice, and they last. So another part of sustainability.
Well, that's a cool way to be a pioneer in the industry. I mean, to have the first LEED Gold in the state, that's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome.
Well, in the United States.
In the United States, even more so. Even more so. So you've talked a little bit about this already, but I'm sort of curious if you have like kind of an overarching like wine philosophy, like either what you like or what you care about within wine.
Well, an overall wine philosophy. I think that when we first started making our wine, I wanted to make a reserve level of wine. And reserve level is not always inexpensive. So, but everybody gets started by buying something that they can afford. And when you first get started, you can't afford much. So I really wanted to have a lower tiered wine, an entry wine, if you will, for consumers. And then we would have our reserve level. And because the reserve level is what I wanted to make, what I really wanted to make. So I think we've accomplished that really well in having some entry wines, and then having the reserve wines that people can progress to. And then, as time goes on, there are people that like ultra premium wine, and so we've successfully done that as well, as made a third tier that people who really enjoy something quite remarkable can buy it as well. So
kind of to pull back a little bit now and kind of look at the industry a bit more in general, in the years you've been in it, you've now been in it almost 25 years, what have you seen? What are the biggest changes you've seen, besides size? What are the biggest changes you've seen in the organ wine industry?
Well, certainly it's brought a lot more people. And I don't think the Allison Inn and Spa would have been there if it hadn't been for the wine industry. I think it's brought restaurateurs. It's brought people from all over the world who've come and visited. I think our forefathers who created the International Pinot Noir celebration had a great vision. Oregon Pinot Camp, which caters to the trade, those that sell the wine to the consumer in distribution systems, has grown to really help the region. But I think you're seeing tourist facilities being built, and one of the, it's not necessarily remarkable because Before I got in the wine industry, I participated in other wine regions, in catered dinners, or just the environment of having some sort of, I don't necessarily want to call it an event, but the ability to taste somebody's wine at their facility and have a meal with it. So a catered meal like that, and people want that. And so I think it's brought a lot of people out to the wine country from the local area, whether it's Salem, Portland, Eugene, Seattle. People even come from Seattle for some special events that we have. So it's just kind of a whole economy of itself that it's created.
And what do you see in the future?
Well, there has to be a limit, and I think there are limitations that are good in whether they're land use laws or they're laws that to ensure the sustainability of what we have. I think that at least I am seeing that when you go over Dundee Hills, you're just seeing a lot more vineyards being planted. And driving through Yamhill, Carlton, AVA a couple weeks ago, it's amazing how many vineyards are being planted. Yeah. Went up to one vineyard, and I don't think there's going to be a lot of other vines planted because it was basically a mountain you had to drive up. And but they have a wonderful spot up on top, about 800, 900 feet. But that's one thing I've always said, is that in Oregon, you really have to travel to places, but I think we're really going to see more and more vineyards much closer to one another than we've ever seen before. But hopefully we'll keep the ecosystem in place to where it's not a mono environment such as they've created in some parts of France, which means you've got to have, and we're fortunate to have oak savannas here, and blackberries are not indigenous to Oregon, but they grow like a wildfire spreads, and those create a balance with insects that is a must that you have to have in your vineyard. But then you also have birds that are important, hawks that are important to sustaining the vineyard properly, because you do have rodents such as gophers and other types of animals that can do harm to the soil and the vines. So you got to have that proper balance.
What about in terms of the size? You mentioned a limit. Do you see more wineries buying other wineries within the estate? Do you see growing to 1,000 wineries or 1,500 wineries in the state? What do you see?
Oh yeah, I think you'll see both of that. I think you're definitely going to see wineries buying wineries, and certainly, France, California, have had people come to invest. Sure. But that's good. I mean, I think you just go through a metamorphosis that will create and spawn off other businesses, meaning other wineries and other vineyards. And I think you observe it in the business world, and the wine business won't be any different, that you'll find some mega producers, and you'll find that there's always room for startups. And because people like the smallness aspect as well. And I think that's one thing that hopefully Oregon won't lose, is that the smallness that you feel. But even with those that have come in to purchase, they've bought individual brands, and they're not just changing the brand to a single name, which is really, really good. And because obviously when you buy another winery, you are buying that brand and their followers. So, but it's change, and every everything and everybody goes through change, and so it'll be painful for some and not so painful for others, but those that can adapt will be able to endure, and it'll still be a great wine country.
So what about the future for Stoller specifically?
Well, I think every year we have to go through some changes. You know, we've already done some things that I originally had not envisioned to be done. Other than building out the vineyard, we've had to add more production facilities. We've had to add volume because of the demand that we've been able to have. We've been able to add, different tiers of wines, as I mentioned before. I didn't think that would probably take place. But in the future, you don't want to stop growing. You don't want to stop learning, because the opposite happens if you allow that. So we'll continue to refine and continue to focus and probably expand the way the present day looks.
And do you have any kind of succession plan in place?
Well, I have a couple sons that I trust that they will be the succession. I've told them that since probably the 5th grade, that they someday they better be prepared. And one of them's here now, and he does a wide variety of things. And then the other one, I assume, at some point will do something, whether it's this business or the staffing business or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I think they'll be poised to take it on.
So what advice would you have for someone who wanted to get into the wine industry today?
Advice to get into the wine industry today. Well, my theme has been pretty even or pretty consistent. That's make sure you have enough money when you start. And the old adage, and I'm not going to even make comment about it other than it is a capital-intensive business, and you need to be equipped for that. Now, I say that, but if somebody wants to be in the wine business, I'd say don't own a winery and don't own vineyards. Just rent space and buy the grapes. That's the best way. Make good wine and then know how to sell it. So I've said that often. I mean, that's kind of the two ends of the spectrum, is be totally virtual and make it, or own everything. So obviously something in between is where you ideally want to be in terms of the ease of getting into the business. So
I'm curious on that. You mentioned that we talked a little bit earlier about selling wine. How do you go about selling wine now if you're trying to break into this kind of market?
Well, fortunately enough, there are weekends that the different areas put on, and we have support help from associations, etc. But Memorial Weekend is a huge weekend, and Thanksgiving weekend is a huge weekend. But you've got to be able to get a little publicity. I think publicity is important, and marketing is kind of the beginning of getting that publicity. You have to have, I think, some pretty good packaging. I'm not a big fan or giving advice that you got to have a fancy name or some crazy name on your label, but it just you start small, you don't overproduce, and you have a place to sell your wine, and then you have to go out and sell it directly. And there's a lot of winemakers that have made their wine and then gone out to restaurants directly and sold their wine, and then they deliver it as well. So they don't have a distributor; they self-distribute. Right. So in getting started, that helps. and they get their wine on the wine list, and people are able to taste it. You go to different tastings. Retail shops put on tastings, so they go and they do it, and you just slowly accumulate a mailing list and then build it and build it and build it.
So the last question I have for you is, what's the one thing about Stoller Family that makes you the proudest? Like, what are you proudest of here?
Oh, I just think it's what the people have accomplished to get us to where we are today. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was fortunate enough. One of the first people I hired had experience in the wine industry in California, and she was mostly in, marketing and direct sales and so forth, and that was a big help. And the next person was someone who'd never been in the wine industry, but learned it and had a great personality, and she did a great job. And then you find additional people that have more experience and have been experienced in the wine business in some way or trade. And then you just get that accumulation of great talent that produces great results. And then in the end, it's whatever your customer thinks of you. And when that's the end result, is what you have to have, is customers that enjoy. And yesterday I had a chance to be around here, and I always run into people that I know, and I would never have known they were visiting here, but they bring friends out, and because they just enjoy coming here to be with our people, to be with our wine, and to be with the view that we're able to provide them.